Devil's Gambit. Written by Steve Abbott. Narrated by Edward James Beesley. For Darlene. Pyongyang, Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. The clank and rumble of tanks and mobile missile carriers faded from the People's Square. A dull rumble of future dark promise. The faint stink of diesel hung in the frigid air in a thin, grey kerosene fog which coated the back of the throat. The dear leader was dead, his flag-draped coffin set on the roof of the Chinese copy of a Russian hearse through a mottled sea of uniforms. Kim Jong-un, his son and now the supreme leader of North Korea, stared out across the square, his face impassive, impenetrable. The wails and screams of grief from below washed over the podium, an undulating bombardment of a nation's mourning. The destiny of the country was now in his hands. He may not have been the oldest of his father's sons, but he was the one in his father's favour. He had weathered the bloodlettings and the internal fights between his siblings. As said in war, the only battle you must win is the last one. The people craved a certain style of leadership, a bold hand that stayed the course no matter the consequence. They would cheer every new 5-year plan, which would promise to give them a better life than they had already endured. But when you were forced to boil weeds for sustenance, a grain of rice or a kernel of wheat is a bounty. What sort of a leader would he be if he did not give his people what they deserved for the hardships they endured? Still, this was a delicate time. Loyalties had to be strengthened, control shored up, and possible future threats disappeared along with their families and relatives. There would be no coup d'etat. History was written in blood, and there was no greatness achieved without sacrifice. Korea would be united again, but under Kim Jong-un's flag. The endeavour would give his trusted commanders a monumental task to keep them busy. There would be no idle hands to plot and scheme his overthrow. His plan would earn him an epithet in history worthy of Alexander the Great or Napoleon. The West and its meddling lackeys would once again taste the bitter ashes of defeat on Korean soil. He turned to his ministers and generals who stood behind him on the reviewing platform. "Enough of this," he said before he stepped away. His bodyguards cut a swathe through the inner circle. "Follow me. There is much to discuss." The bright banners and flags were a sharp contrast to the drab dress of the people. They were now the officially confirmed subjects of Kim Jong-un, supreme leader of all that you see and all that you do not. From just below the reviewing stand, Special Assistant Kwon Tae-sung shuffled his feet in the December cold. Stout and middle-aged, he was unremarkable in every way except his eyes, which missed nothing. The devil, as they say, is in the details. He had noticed a great many bicycles in the procession of the army. Fuel was getting scarce even for them. This funeral, this outpouring of grief at the death of such a tyrant was a grand show for the world. The same had happened when Stalin died. Not even 40 years later, they ripped any reminder of the man from their country. Just how many of the tear-streaked faces would not live through this winter, frozen or starved to death because of the useless squandering of fuel to lay their supreme leader to rest? Even in death, Kim Il-sung managed to kill. Growing shortages of goods and critical services took their toll. When people could not get basic staples, unrest was sure to follow, even here. A small uprising of farmers in the north just a month before had been halted with brutal expediency. Another blood-soaked example of what would happen if you tested the will of the party. Kwon Tae-sung stood and shivered. Who was left to blame? The world had gone mad. North Korea was the only remaining bulwark of communism. China was nothing more than a cheap pool of labour for the West. Russia was, for all intents and purposes, ruled by a Tsar once again. They might have called him a president, but nobody with half a brain was
Sample complete. Ready to continue?